Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. A homeless girl saves a millionaire, and his life changes forever. In the dusty streets of Los Angeles, where concrete smothers dreams and skyscrapers cast long shadows like forgotten memories, lived a little girl named Maya Johnson. She was 11 years old, but her gaze already bore the marks of an age that only the abandoned understand. Small and thin, she had brown hair, often tangled, evidence of nights without a pillow and days without a comb. Her clothes, a skirt worn to the very core and a t-shirt too big for her, stained with dust and memories, were an integral part of her urban camouflage. She blended into the background like a fragment of the asphalt, ignored by the world around her. Since her mother's sudden death, Maya had wandered alone. She had never known her father. Perhaps he had never wanted to know her. Perhaps he was just a passing ghost in her mother's short life. Social services had tried, for a time, to take her into care. But Maya had escaped, refusing to be trapped in a system that inspired neither trust nor warmth. She preferred the streets, cruel but honest. In the evenings, she rummaged through the garbage bags in the back of downtown fast food restaurants, hoping to find a leftover hamburger or a forgotten fries. She knew the delivery times, the faces of the employees who sometimes tossed her a still warm bun without saying a word. She slept not far from an abandoned warehouse, under a shelter made of cardboard boxes, tarps with holes in them, and an old curtain that served as a door. She kept her few treasures there, an old book without a cover, a teddy bear found in a dumpster, and a crumpled photo of her mother, her eternal smile frozen in the yellowed paper. Passers-by didn't see her. She was invisible in a world obsessed with speed, productivity, and appearance. Maya didn't exist. She was a blurred silhouette at the corner of crowded avenues, a muffled sound of footsteps beneath the honking horns, a silent breath between two buildings. But what the world didn't know was that Maya was extraordinaire. She had this rare ability to understand what was happening around her, to read glances, to detect dangers, to sniff out intentions. Her mind worked like a living map of the city. She knew the most discreet shortcuts, the rooftops where she could sleep safely, the walls that listened and those that spoke. Her survival instinct was not born of fear, but of intelligence. She knew when to speak and when to remain silent. When to run and when to observe. And most importantly, she had not lost her ability to hope. Every morning, looking at the sky through the electric cables, she said to herself, "One day it will be different." She didn't yet know that this day was fast approaching. Just a few miles from the harsh, dusty world where Maya survived, stood a cold, majestic tower of glass and steel. Perched high above downtown Los Angeles, it overlooked the city like a silent throne, inaccessible to ordinary mortals. It was on the top floor of this skyscraper that Maya resided. Richard Ellington, 54, CEO of the conglomerate Ellington Dynamics, a sprawling financial empire with operations in technology, real estate, energy, and even private defense. Richard was the very embodiment of capitalist success: tailored suit, precise gestures, surgical language. Cold. Methodical. Brilliant. He ran his business with clinical precision, and his decisions shook international markets. He spoke little, listened extensively, and never showed his emotions. For his colleagues, he was a role model. For his competitors, a predator. But behind this facade of power, Richard Ellington was just a man alone. His wife, Elena, had died of cancer 15 years earlier. Her disappearance had torn away what remained of humanity in him. Since then, he had closed the doors of his heart like one seals a safe. He had cut ties with his brother, his cousins, his university friends. His world was reduced to screens, numbers, contracts, and an icy silence. His luxurious apartment, though filled with works of art, echoed like a crypt. Business had become his refuge, but also his golden prison. That morning, he had gotten up at 5:30 a.m., like every other day. Black coffee, a review of the stock market indices, a quick briefing with his security chief. That day, a special trip was planned, a confidential meeting at a high-security conference center nestled in the desert hills outside the city. There, he was to sign a strategic agreement with a European surveillance technology company. The deal was sensitive. Discreet. Few people knew its true nature. His trusted driver, Carlton, a discreet man with a graying mustache, was waiting for him outside the mansion where he sometimes stayed between meetings. The gleaming black Rolls-Royce Phantom purred softly at a stop, accompanied in the back by an armored SUV carrying two discreet but trained security guards. Richard descended the marble steps, elegant as ever, ignoring the curious stares of passers-by and hotel employees. What he didn't know was that on that day, something, or rather, someone, would change his life forever. A few meters away, hidden behind a rusty container, Maya was watching. She wasn't there by chance. She knew this wealthy neighborhood well. She often hung around to pick up leftover breakfasts on the terraces of luxury cafes. But that day, one detail caught her attention. She had heard two men talking in low voices in a nearby alley. Well-dressed men, but with a troubled appearance. They were talking about an imminent accident on the canyon road. And above all, a word she had never heard in her life as a street child. Ellington. Intrigued and tense, Maya cautiously approached, slipping like a shadow. She watched the black car waiting in front of the hotel's private entrance. An intuition, a shiver down her spine, pushed her to act. Something was not going. She felt it. And when security turned away for a moment to answer a crackling radio, Maya saw her chance. Without thinking, she approached the vehicle, slipped in through the back, and silently crawled into the half-open trunk, squeezing herself between two compartments. She held her breath. The engine roared. The car moved. Maya didn't know where she was going. But she knew why. Something was going to happen to this man, and she had to witness it. The road wound through the Topanga Canyon, narrow and isolated, bordered by ochre cliffs and sparse scrub. The wind blew hard, raising dust, and only a few birds of prey circled slowly in the sky, as if sensing the coming storm. The Rolls-Royce Noir, majestic and silent, advanced between the rocks. Behind it, the security vehicle followed at a good distance. Inside, Richard Ellington leafed through the documents of the upcoming agreement, concentrated, while Carlton, his faithful driver, drove carefully. Everything seemed calm, until all hell broke loose. An explosion tore through the air. A deafening blast ripped the armored SUV to pieces. A cloud of fire and charred metal spread for several meters, devastating the roadway. The Rolls-Royce was thrown onto the shoulder. Carlton lost control. The tires squealed, the rear of the vehicle hit a rock, and the body twisted under the impact. "My God!" Richard yelled, pressed against his seat. Carlton, injured in the forehead by a shard of glass, was still trying to get out of the vehicle, but the impact had stunned him. Richard, his hands shaking, pushed the door open and got out in a disorderly movement. He staggered on the burning asphalt. He had barely taken a few steps when a dry whistle grazed his ear, a bullet. A second later, another bullet grazed his leg. He collapsed to the ground, the searing pain making it hard to breathe. That's when he saw them. 3 men, armed with assault rifles, approached in formation, methodical, determined. Dressed in black, their faces partially masked, they left no room for doubt. This was not a simple robbery, it was a planned execution. And behind this attack, a name floated in Richard's mind like a poison resurfacing: Victor Kessler. Victor had been his partner for over 10 years, before Richard had him expelled from their firm for fraud and manipulation. Humiliated and ruined, Kessler had disappeared into the shadows. But he hadn't forgotten. He had waited. He had prepared. And now, he wanted to take back what he thought belonged to him, at the cost of blood. Richard, on the ground, tried to crawl. He could hear their footsteps approaching, the sinister echo of their boots on the asphalt. His heart was beating so hard he thought it would stop. And then, against all logic, against all expectations, a small figure emerged from the car. Maya. She leaped out of the trunk without thinking, as if driven by an invisible force. She ran toward Richard, her arms grazed, her face covered in dust, her knees bleeding. Gunshots rang out around her, but she didn't slow down. She threw herself at him, grabbed his arm, and in a hoarse but determined voice, whispered, "Come on. We have to hide." Richard, stunned, didn't understand what he was seeing. This child, this unfamiliar face, burnt by the sun and the street, she wasn't supposed to be there. And yet, it was Shuhich pulled him towards life. Maya helped him up, supporting with all her strength the weight of this man twice her size. She dragged him behind a rock face, a natural fold carved into the cliff, barely visible from the road. Bullets whizzed through the air, ricocheting off the rocks. Maya pressed herself against Richard, covering him with her small body, and dug into her makeshift bag for a worn strip of cloth, which she instinctively applied to his injured leg. Her hands were shaking. She'd never done this before. But she'd seen videos, watched paramedics from afar. She knew better than to let the blood flow. She pressed hard, and despite the pain, Richard said nothing. He was looking at her. Really. For the first time in years, he was looking at a human being without a mask, without a contract, without interest. And what he saw wasn't a street child. It was a heroine. "Don't move," she whispered, half sobbing, concentrated, her eyes shining with a mixture of fear and courage. "I will protect you." Richard, the great Richard Ellington, the man of power, the impassive billionaire, felt a hot tear roll down his cheek. Not because of pain. Not because of fear. But because in that moment, he understood he was no longer alone. Short of breath, shaky legs, Maya grabbed the arm of Richard Ellington and helped her up despite her injury. She was frail, her knees were bleeding, but in her actions, there was neither hesitation nor fear. Her only thought, put it in safety. Around them, the echo of the shots still resonated against the rocky walls of the Topanga Canyon. The sun beat down high in the sky, making the air almost unbreathable. Every minute counted. The armed men were still prowling, searching for their prey like dogs sniffing out a trail. "This way," Maya breathed, gently tugging Richard's sleeve. She led him off the main road, towards a barely visible crack in the wall. There, a narrow and steep path, invisible to the untrained eye, wound between dry bushes and stones. Maya knew this path well. She had slept there, alone, years earlier, fleeing social workers, street gangs, and even the rain. It was its territory, its labyrinth. And today, it would be their salvation. They moved slowly. Richard limped severely, his torn pants revealing a bleeding wound. With each step, he winced but said nothing. Maya, however, walked forward with a clenched jaw, holding firm. She now carried the billionaire's weight on her shoulder, like a child carrying a wounded sibling. A shrill noise suddenly split the air. Boom! A stone exploded a few meters from them, thrown into pieces by a stray bullet. One of the pieces hit Maya in the arm. She fell to her knees in shock, a trickle of blood running down her forearm. She stifled a scream, but got up immediately. Without a word, without a tear. She gritted her teeth, tore off a piece of her own skirt, and wrapped it around the wound. "We must continue." Richard, stunned, wanted to protest, to tell her to rest. But he didn't have time. Maya had already resumed her journey. After a grueling 20-minute walk, they reached an old shelter, hidden behind dead bushes and stones. It was an ancient fire observation post, long abandoned, with a rusty tin roof and a twisted, half-torn-off door. Maya forced his way in, then helped Richard lie down on a pile of old sandbags. Inside, the air was stifling, but at least they were out of sight. Maya searched the corners of the shelter, lit by the rays of light piercing the disjointed planks. She turned over dusty crates, cobwebs full of rusty tools. And there, in a metal drawer, she found what she was looking for, an old emergency phone, half dismantled, probably forgotten there for years. It no longer had a screen. Just a circuit board, exposed wires, a nearly dead battery. But Maya was no ordinary child. She had seen mechanics tinkering with cables, had spent hours watching tutorials in electronics store windows, and she had learned the hard way how to improvise. Her fingers were shaking, covered in blood and dust, but she took the case apart, readjusted the connections, and blew on the motherboard to clear the dirt. She bit into a cable to readjust it, then connected the battery to a small hand dynamo she found in a spare box. "Hold on. Hold on, come on," she whispered to the machine, as if talking to it. And suddenly, a faint but distinct sound rose from the box. The signal was weak, almost non-existent, but enough to send a short distress message. She quickly tapped. "Attack. Topanga Canyon. Man injured. Need help. Send help." She managed to send the message over a still-active emergency frequency, once used by firefighters. One chance. One attempt. She prayed it would be enough. Then she collapsed next to Richard, breathless, her muscles exhausted, her arm burning. "I sent a message," she whispered, almost in a whisper. "They will come." Richard, his eyes filled with emotion, looked at her for a long time. This child, unknown only a few hours earlier, had not only just saved his life, but teach him the value of raw courage, pure determination, unconditional humanity. And in this tense silence, in the middle of this old refuge forgotten by the world, something sacred had just been born. The day was slowly declining over the Topanga desert hills, bathing the dust in the red gold of twilight. The silence, after the chaos, seemed almost unreal. In the old shelter, Maya lay on the floor, leaning against the wall. She had finally lost consciousness, drained of strength, her arms still wrapped in a piece of blood-stained cloth. Richard lay nearby, staring at the light filtering through the cracked planks of the wall. Every breath reminded him of the pain in his leg, but it was worry for Maya that gnawed at him the most. He tried to stay awake, to keep his mind clear, but exhaustion was winning. He didn't know if his call had been heard. He didn't know if they would survive the night. And then, finally, a noise. Distant. Gradual. Helicopter blades. First a buzzing, then a distinct rumble. Then voices. Coordinated shouts. Boots on rocks. Dogs barking, help was coming. A beam of light erupted from outside the shelter, flooding the interior with sudden brightness. Men in tactical gear entered, weapons at the ready, but quickly lowered their postures upon seeing the scene, a critically injured man, and an unconscious child clutching a bare electrical cable. "This is Alpha Unit, 2 survivors located. CEO Richard Ellington is alive. We have an injured child. Evacuating immediately." Paramedics took over. Richard was quickly carried onto a stretcher. But as they moved away from the shelter, he turned his head toward Maya and said, in a weak but determined voice, "She's coming up with me. Don't leave her here. She saved my life." The rescue team understood. A few minutes later, 2 helicopters rose into the canyon sky, carrying the 2 survivors to Cedars-Sinai Hospital, one of the most renowned in Los Angeles. At the hospital, everything was done to stabilize their conditions. Richard was operated on for his leg injury and placed under observation. Maya, for her part, received emergency care, disinfection, transfusion, and a long sleep induced to soothe her bruised body. But when Richard woke up in his luxurious bedroom the next morning, his first question was, "The little one. Is she alive?" The doctor hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. She's stable. She survived." A shudder ran through him. Not because of the physical pain, but because he understood, deep down, that he had to alto this unknown child. He insisted on staying at the hospital until she woke up. He refused the press. He refused his team. He even refused to sign the contract agreed upon the day before. He wanted to know who Maya was. When journalists managed to reach him despite everything, Richard agreed to a press conference. Exceptional, held in the hospital lobby. In hospital clothes, thin, his face marked but his gaze firm, he addressed the nation. "I'm alive today because of a street child. Maya Johnson. 11 years old. She has no address, no parents, no resources. But she has more courage and dignity than any of us. While others betrayed me, she without knowing me, risked her life to save me. She is the true heroine. She is the one who deserves to be heard." His words, broadcast live on major television networks, sent shockwaves across the country. Social media went up in flames. The image of a broken billionaire speaking emotionally about a little street girl shocked public opinion. In the days that followed, a federal investigation was opened. The authorities searched the canyon, finding traces of the explosion, fragments of weapons, and above all, the old telephone tinkered with by Maya. Despite its rudimentary state, it contained an audio recording. Claire. Two men could be heard talking in an alleyway just before the attack. "Are you sure he'll be alone?" "Yes, Victor wants it clean. No witnesses. No going back." These voices were identified. One belonged to a mercenary already wanted for other crimes. The other was that of Victor Kessler. With this evidence, the FBI launched a blitz. Kessler, who was attempting to flee the country via a private jet chartered from a secondary airport, was arrested at dawn, handcuffs on his wrists, face frozen. The charges: attempted premeditated murder, criminal conspiracy, and the use of armed mercenaries. The evidence was irrefutable. Meanwhile, Maya was still asleep. But throughout the city, her name was already beginning to circulate. The child who saved the giant. Maya the brave. The voice of the invisible. And Richard, sitting at her bedside every day, spoke to her gently. Like a daughter we'd forgotten, but now refused to lose. After several days of intensive care, Maya opened her eyes in a hospital room bathed in light. Wires were attached to her arms, and a heart monitor blinked softly at her bedside. She first felt silence, then presence. Richard Ellington was there, sitting beside her, holding her little hand in his. "You're safe now, Maya. And you'll never be alone again." She didn't answer. She didn't have the words yet. But she squeezed his hand. And that simple gesture was more powerful than any speech. After weeks of hospitalization, Maya was temporarily transferred to a foster home for minors without a legal guardian. Social services, cautious, emphasized that procedure had to be followed. However, just a few days after his transfer, an unexpected announcement shocked the officials. Richard Ellington had filed an official adoption application. The media immediately seized on the story. California's most powerful man asks to adopt the street kid who saved him. Many skeptics thought it was a PR stunt, an image strategy. But those who knew Richard knew he was no longer the same. The cold, distant man had changed. Radically. In a confidential interview with the family court judge, he simply stated, "She saved my life. Not just physically. She opened up a world I had forgotten about. Now it's my turn to give her hers." The procedures, exceptionally, very accelerated. Psychologists and social workers were impressed by the strong bond between Maya and Richard. This was not a one-sided rescue, they had chosen each other. A few weeks later, before an emotional court, the judge proclaimed, "Maya Johnson is now Maya Ellington." The newspapers headlined, "A street child saves a billionaire, a modern fairy tale in Los Angeles." She had nothing. He had everything. Together, they found what they were missing. On TV sets, experts debated. In schools, their story was told like a parable. And on the streets of LA, children from shelters looked at Maya like a heroine who looked like them. A year later, Maya lived in a house filled with laughter, with a dog, a swing in the garden, a library full of books, and a grand piano that she adored. She learned quickly. Read with passion. Composed her first melodies. But above all, she didn't forget anything. She sometimes spent hours in the evening, gazing up at the stars, thinking back to those cold nights on the street. The smell of the garbage. The silences. And the other children still there. It was one evening, while she was sharing a hot chocolate with Richard, that she gently put down her cup and said, "There are others. They're still out there. We can't pretend I'm the only one." Richard looked at her silently, his throat tight. She was right. And she had just offered him a new mission. With Richard's resources and Maya's vision, was born the Maya Foundation, an ambitious organization, resolutely geared towards direct action. Warm homes, not dormitories impersonal, but real living spaces with educators trained in kindness and resilience. Mobile schools, installed in buses transformed into traveling classes, to go where the children are really, not where we think they should be. A mentoring program, where former young people from the street who had become adults supervised the newcomers, offering example, hope, and stability. A psychological support center, to help heal invisible wounds. The foundation quickly became a model. Foreign delegations came to observe the concept. Celebrities offered their support. But Maya remained humble. She often said, "I'm not a miracle. I'm just what thousands of children could become, if they were given a chance." For his part, Richard Ellington never fully returned to the world of before. He retained a strategic position within his group, but delegated most of the decision-making. He refused cold investment panels, preferring to visit the foundation centers, sitting on the steps talking to the children. When he was invited to speak at universities, economic forums, international summits, he always repeated the same phrase. "I thought I was a powerful man. But true strength is a child who protected me with her heart." Thanks to Maya, I discovered what it truly means to live. It wasn't a slogan. It was his testimony. His truth. 2 years later the room was sumptuous. Crystal chandeliers cast a soft light over the white-clothed tables. The event was held in the grand auditorium of the Walt Disney Concert Hall in Los Angeles. It was the annual fundraising evening for the Maya Foundation, which in just 2 years has become one of the most respected initiatives in the country for the reintegration of homeless youth. Hundreds of distinguished guests were present, business leaders, philanthropists, movie stars, senators. All gathered that evening, not to show off, but to listen. The music died down. The lights dimmed. A single spotlight fell on the stage. And Maya Ellington, now 13 years old, enters silence. She wore a simple but elegant midnight blue dress, donated by a former resident of the foundation who had become a stylist. Her hair was pulled back, revealing her calm face, her eyes shining with gentle assurance and a maturity beyond her years. She stepped toward the microphone. Behind her, a screen displayed a photo of herself 2 years earlier, dirty, tired, her eyes lost in the streets of Los Angeles. A murmur went through the room. She took a deep breath. Then, in a clear, calm voice, she spoke. "I have no title. I'm not a doctor, an artist, or a president. I'm just Maya. A street child. A forgotten child. 2 years ago, I was hungry. I slept on the floor. I was afraid, of everything. Afraid of people, afraid of indifference. Afraid of disappearing without anyone noticing. Then one day, I heard a word. A name. A danger. And without thinking, I acted. Not because I was brave. But because I still had something the street hadn't killed, my heart. That night, I saved a man. And he, in turn, saved me. Together, we decided that my story shouldn't be unique." She paused. Her gaze swept the room. The camera flashes were off. The silence was complete. Faces were tense with emotion. "I'm not a hero. I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just followed my instincts. I saw danger, and I chose to love instead of running away. But if I, a little street girl, homeless, with no future, could change one man's life, then imagine what we could do, all together. Imagine if every abandoned child found a hand. An ear. A look. Imagine if every powerful man listened to a child. Imagine a world where no one becomes invisible." She paused. A long silence. A tear rolled gently down her cheek, which she didn't wipe away. Then she added, more quietly. "I don't want to be the exception. I want to be the beginning." Tears flowed in the room. There were quiet sniffles. Even the most hardened, tycoons, politicians, men and women accustomed to authority, were deeply affected. Richard Ellington, sitting in the front row, had his head bowed, his eyes moist. He didn't applaud. Not right away. He looked at her, like one watches the sunrise after a long night. Then the whole room stood up. A standing ovation, spontaneous, massive. No words. Just the sincere crash of thousands of hands clapping to say, thanks. It wasn't just a charity gala. It was a calling. A turning point. Pledges of donations exploded. New cities contacted the foundation. Schools asked to receive Maya's testimony. Dozens of young people from the center sent letters. I want to be the beginning too. And when Maya left the stage, discreetly, without seeking glory, she smiled. A discreet smile, that of someone who knows that he has planted a seed, and that she will grow far beyond what he will ever see.